And when we're safe, when the danger is over, the parasympathetic branch takes over automatically. And that's our brake pedal. And we step on the brake to slow down and to get back to some kind of normal status quo. Jean Piaget was a biology professor, and his theory was a cognitive theory about how the brain works. And he felt that brain maturation had to do with age, and young people can't think like older people. So when the four stages are sensory motor, pre-op, concrete, and formal. Sensory motors for babies, and they don't comprehend adult concepts. They're not at that maturation level. And then when you're a toddler, you're pre-operational, which means before you can operate on the environment and learn a great deal. Now that's a little bit misleading because they're avid learners when it comes to vocabulary. They're actually better than adults in learning a second language, for example. So they're learning, it's just not, they just don't do it the same way. And they're not logical, they're superstitious, and they're not scientific, they're pre-scientific, so their sense of humor is off. They think that teddy bear has feelings, and they're egocentric, they're just really peculiar. And so we keep them home, we don't send them to school because they're not ready to learn. And then when they turn 5, they have a good opportunity to be able to figure out things that are concrete. Concrete means that if you can see it and touch it and manipulate it, you can figure it out. So now we send them to elementary school, and they're very good learners. And it's not until they're about 13 or 14 where they have the capacity to think about things that they haven't experienced directly. So we call it symbolic reasoning. And it's like the mystery of algebra, or the mystery of physics. Yes?
Could you also describe that as abstract?
Yeah, very abstract ways of thinking. Good. Piaget discovered that because as a biology professor in college, he had 3 daughters that were very young, and they were smart girls, but they couldn't understand college physics or college biology that he tried to teach them. So that's how he got his idea initially. Erik Erikson came up with a theory about how our personality develops. And so he said we go through 8 stages in life. So both Piaget and Erikson are talking about stage theories, and stage theories are based on age. So 8 times during our life, we come across an issue that we need to solve. And if we solve it in a positive manner, then we graduate intact to the next stage, and our personality is functioning very nicely. If we have bad experience, a little bit of negative, that's okay, because people are very resilient. And it's not harmful, it just keeps you from being naive in many ways. So you don't always have to have a perfect experience. If you have terrible traumatic experience, it does count against you, and it can damage your personality. And even though people are resistant, they can go back and do counseling, and they can deal with it. remedially and overcome it in the long run, it still does some damage. So it's important to know which issues are coming up so you can plan for positive outcomes. Or if you have traumatic experience, you may want to confront it in a therapeutic sense and try to overcome it. But it all has to do with trying to have a fully functioning personality without a lot of psyche damage. Keratogen is a toxic substance that can come into contact with pregnant mothers, cross the placenta, and affect the unborn child. And the unborn child can have birth defects, mental and physical, from keratogens. We said that the alcohol syndrome is the worst example. Classical conditioning is a good one. We have 4 steps, and so usually I ask a couple questions on can you identify the 4 steps of classical conditioning. So we have step 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 4 steps, and this is a model based on Pavlov and his dog. So step 1 is what we call the unconditional stimuli. In other words, a stimuli is something that gets your attention. Anything that gets your attention is a stimuli. And unconditional stimuli would be something that doesn't need anything extra. It's just on its own, it gets your attention. So, do you recall what they used for the unconditional stimuli? Food. Dog food. So the dog food. And the unconditional response to the dog food was?
Saliva.
Salivation is a physical response. Now, the key is step 3, where you find some neutral thing and you pair it with the dog food repeatedly, kind of like lightning and thunder, over and over, until it becomes a learned or conditioned stimuli. You recall what they used there?
Wasn't it a bell?
The bell. So you ring the bell and present the dog food. The 4th step is a conditioned response, salivation, but it's the same as step 2. You just don't need the dog food anymore. So those are the 4 steps, pretty straightforward, but very powerful and subtle, and they use that in commercial advertising. The operant conditioning is 1 step further, where it's all based on Thorndike's law of effect. And Thorndike observed that if people get rewarded for their behaviors, they will continue those behaviors. But if people get punished for those behaviors, then they quit or extinct and change direction.
That's part of law and effect, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Thorndike's law of effect means that when we get rewarded, we do it again. When we get punished, we quit. So that's powerful. They use operant conditioning in dog obedience training, and it works great. Memory is fairly permanent, and we can enhance our memory. We know we can improve our memory through mnemonics. Mnemonics is any simple device to help us remember better. So encoding is pretty much how we put things into our memory, and it's a 3-step overlapping process. You have to listen and hear. I guess that's goes without saying. Listen and hear, and for some that's easy, and for some that's hard. You can't concentrate, or it's just there's a lot of interference. So then you file systematically what you hear in your brain so that you can retrieve it when you need it. So it's a three-step process of kind of a concentration procedure. Punishment is frowned upon by psychologists. They don't really like punishment because it doesn't really predict the human response. It works better if you work in a positive sense, giving rewards and reinforcing the target behavior rather than punishing people for the off-target behavior. Self-actualization is the idea of Abraham Maslow, and you can depict it with the pyramid. It's actually the philosophy of humanism up here in a nutshell. And what it tells us is the basic needs are at the bottom, and we naturally ascend to the top. Humans have an affinity to rise to the cream of the top, so to speak. So our basic needs are at the bottom, like food and water. And if we don't get that, we don't care about anything else. But once we get it, we do care about all kinds of things, like social life and wisdom and learning and beauty and things like that. The Oedipus complex is stage 3 of Freud's childhood fixation stages. And that's where the little boy falls in love with the mother and wants a mother for himself. Freud said that we have 3 parts to our personality, all in competition. We have the itty-bitty baby going for pleasure. We have the superego, it tries to be perfect. And then we have the ego, who does reality checking to make sure that you're on the right process. Each one is kind of legitimate, but you need to have the ego in control. The Big Five was a summary of the many, many traits, personality traits. So if you wanted to measure how you're different than somebody else in the class, you could use the Big Five. And we have S for stability, how stable the personality is. We have E for how extroverted the personality is. A for agreeableness. O for openness. And C for conscientiousness. And those are 5 dimensions that we can actually evaluate how people's personality works. Reciprocal determinism is also a triangular model. Yes.
What was the O again? I'm sorry.
Open.
The O in
O?
the O in Seahawk.
In the Big Five, the O, open
Openness.
stands for.
Openness. Okay.
Thank you. Openness, yeah. In the reciprocal determinism, it's all reciprocal, the arrow goes both ways. So we find out S is for the self, and the self affects the behavior. And this is the mental and the physical self. So you can direct your behavior. The behavior also in turn affects our thought process and our self-esteem. The behavior affects the environment affects the behavior, and so on and so forth. So it's the self, our behavioral action, and the environment that we find ourselves in, all in interaction. Cognitive dissonance happens when we think one thing and we do another, and it's very stressful. So we can predict that people will change